Hello and welcome to Foreign Policy Focus, episode 52. I am the show's host, Kyle. I'm so happy that everybody's back and tuned in. I think it's so awesome that people tune in and listen to my show 3 days a week. It's always fun to have viewers and to think that I'm actually helping to get a message across. So if you like the show, help to spread the show. Whoever you think may be interested in, post it in the groups where the Facebook groups where you think that people would be interested. I know libertarian groups, there tends to be an anti-war bias. Same with more principled, progressive groups, Jill Stein types often tend to actually be principled in an anti-war message. So any groups like that, post a show up, let people know about it. Or if people find hostility towards it, post it there too. I'm more than willing to defend the ideas that I put forward in the show, as well as all the news sources that I use and everything like that. I feel everything's pretty solid here, not only my philosophy, but also just how I go about collecting the news stories that I use here and conveying the message to you. So here we go with today's show. The first story I have is Trump says that the U.S. will continue to support Article 5 in NATO. Article 5 is really the most important thing that NATO has. It's the Mutual Defense Pact. It says that if one of the 29 member countries get attacked, then the other 28 member countries will come to help and assist and defend that 29th country. It doesn't matter if it's the United States getting attacked by Russia or Montenegro getting attacked by Georgia, just because I hate trying to pick another country in that region of the world that's not a part of NATO already. There were some questions as to how much Trump supported this. If he supported it, I guess, when he was at the NATO conference on his world tour last month, Trump left it somewhat ambiguous as to whether he actually did support Article 5 or not. This was really only a question for Trump because of what he said during the campaign, where he said NATO was outdated. Of course, he walked all that back pretty much the second he got elected. I believe well before he was in office even. And so this is where we stood. But I guess there was still some question. People weren't sure, but I think everybody was pretty sure that Trump was going to support Article 5. Now, when you look at the Article 5 situation, just from a cost-benefit analysis for the United States, we are now in a position where if Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, Montenegro, if any of those countries are attacked by, say, Russia or any other country, then the U.S. is bound to come to the defense of those countries with, I'm assuming, all force needed to defend that country. And so that could mean hundreds of thousands of U.S. soldiers pouring into Eastern Europe in order to defend a country that most Americans know absolutely nothing about or have any ties or care to. Now, at the same time, people will support, this binds all the other NATO countries to come to the U.S.'s aid if the United States is attacked. And so even if this does happen, even if all the countries follow through on their pledge, Montenegro has a couple thousand people in their army. While the Latvian and the Estonian army are certainly much stronger than a couple thousand, it's nowhere near the size of the U.S. army. I wouldn't be surprised if the U.S. expenditures on defense are pretty close to a large percentage of the GDP for a few of these smaller countries. And so there's just no way they could really contribute in a fight against a Russia or a China superpower in defense of the United States. And that's if they even come through and do this, right? All these little countries, I think their idea is that, this is great because of the U.S., if we're attacked, the U.S. will come and defend us. But the United States is attacked. What will make them actually come to the defense of the United States? You have a lot of people in Europe who simply don't like Donald Trump, and so I guess there would probably be a serious question as to whether some of these smaller states actually come to the defense of the United States if it was ever needed. And even if they do, how effective would it be anyways? Probably not very. Now, of course, this is the United States directly subsidizing the defense costs of all these other smaller countries. They know that they don't need much of an army because they are tied to an army of, 500,000 strong that spends $1 trillion a year on national defense. The United States outspends the next 8 countries or 10 countries, or depending on the stat you look at, combined each year on defense. We have a massive military and in the NATO alliance. And so, there's just nothing that is going to intimidate the United States. And so for all these other smaller NATO members, they just have so much support backing them that it would be unwise. It's foolish of them to spend money on defense, because no matter what they put into defense, it won't even compare to what the United States puts into defense. And so their full reliance, I guess, would be on the United States coming to their defense. And certainly the way some of these world globalist types talk, that's certainly what they want to happen. Now, another concern about this is just the way that some of these Western European countries, specifically Germany, are looking at cyber crimes. During the whole DNC and Podesta hats, when it came to the whole DNC and Podesta hats and all the nonsense and overreacting that came along with that, one of the ideas that was floated was that a cyber attack on a NATO member country would trigger Article 5, and you could see a military response to a cyber attack if, in fact, this was done to a NATO member country. So let's say Russia had Estonia. According to some people's interpretation of Article 5, that would mean the U.S. is bound to go to war for Estonia against Russia after Russia carried out a cyber attack against Estonia. So I think these are just some of the more ridiculous things that occur because the U.S. is in this complex and overextended alliance known as NATO. There's certainly no benefit to the United States of extending the alliance so far right up to Russia's border, so Russia certainly feels threatened by the NATO alliance at this point. I think it's something that Turkey probably uses as leverage against the United States. Turkey, in a lot of ways, has been a bad actor in the Middle East region, certainly allowing the jihadist highway to run through Turkey, allow ISIS gas, oil to flow out of Turkey. Are ways that the NATO alliance and NATO alliance member countries have, taken advantage of the alliance to do what they want. And so allowing these states to act out like this could only provoke a war with their neighbors, and it's getting closer and closer to the only neighbor left is Russia. Of course, on the last show I talked about Ukraine wanting to be a country that wants to join NATO. Of course, this is the post-coup government in Ukraine after Victoria Nuland orchestrated the coup there that replaced the pro-Russian dictator with the pro-Russian democratically elected prime minister versus the EU-appointed prime minister. Now let's move on to the Qatar situation. Now let's move on to updates with the Qatar situation. The first thing we have, and if anybody's interested in the past two shows, I've really covered it. I suggest go back to listen to episodes 50 and 51 where I really nailed down what's going on in Qatar. Trump was asked a question while at a press conference with the Romanian president about what was going on with the Saudi blockade of Qatar. Trump's response was that unfortunately Qatar had supported very bad groups in this area of the world for years and years, and that something needed to be done about it, and Saudi Arabia was doing this about it. Trump strongly implied that this was talked about on Trump's trip to Saudi Arabia, and if they didn't come to an agreement, this would happen. Trump certainly green-lighted something like this to happen. Rex Tillerson, Secretary of State, then comes out and says that Saudi Arabia should ease the blockade on Qatar and recommended that other countries in the region do the same. He said that Qatar has made improvements when it comes to Qatari citizens going and funding terrorism, especially in Syria. And so while I guess Trump and Tillerson could walk back and say, hey, we didn't say anything directly contradictory, the tone of Trump's comments and Tillerson's comments were certainly opposing. Trump seemingly supports the blockade and has condemned Qatar as a state that does support terrorism, and I don't know if Trump's wrong about that. It certainly seems to me that Qatar has supported a lot of jihadist groups within Syria over the years. However, a lot of that seems to be at the blessing of the United States. The United States couldn't directly arm some of these Syrian rebel groups that they wanted to arm, so they had the Qataris do it for them. The U.S. at least tolerated while these weapons went to jihadists, and certainly didn't end the program because the weapons were going to the jihadists, even though it was well known. Even while Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, she said that you couldn't separate the jihadis from the moderates. And so one has to wonder just what is going on with the Trump administration, whether this is complete disorganization and Tillerson either going against Trump or not being aware of what Trump was going to say and then saying the opposite, or if the statements were coordinated that way the U.S. could walk the fence while at one time condemning to some extent the Saudi blockade, at the other time supporting it. The U.S. has 10,000 or I believe even 11,000 soldiers stationed in Qatar, while Saudi Arabia is a key U.S. ally in the fight in Yemen, as well as other just geopolitical strategy reasons around the region. And so we have allies on both sides of this fight. We sold tons of weapons to both of these countries. Both of these countries have ties to the West. They're both GCC countries. They both share a border on the Arabian Peninsula. And it is simply for the Trump administration, they're really looking at a mess here because they have to try to resolve this conflict between not only Qatar and Saudi Arabia, but Qatar and the other GCC countries as well, on top of Egypt and Libya and Yemen, who have all come out and also said that they do not support the actions of the Qataris and have either recalled ambassadors or placed embargoes or said that Qataris are not allowed in their country. The GCC countries are going to allow Qataris who are married to their own citizens to remain in those countries, so either Saudi Arabia, UAE, or Bahrain. Originally, Saudi, UAE, and Bahrain said that all Qatari citizens must leave their countries, but now they've walked that back a little bit after they face some international backlash on that. This continues to push Qatar into the hands of Iran and Turkey. Qatar has always taken a more diplomatic stance towards Iran than the rest of the GCC, and at times has even taken like kind of a pro-Iranian stance. What triggered this whole event was the Qatari support for the Iranians, and to say that they didn't think it was good for the Arab countries to go to the Iranians, which I guess isn't even support, it's just saying no to war. In the last episode, I really highlighted how this situation seemed to cast light on the Trump administration as really not knowing what was going on in foreign policy, and that seems to hold true. We're watching our allies walk into the hands of our enemies, while at the same time we're causing meaningful splits in the Sunni alliance that the U.S. really utilizes in the Middle East. And while I don't support the U.S. foreign policy overseas, if Trump is trying to do what it seems like he's trying to do, and that's, advance U.S. foreign policy, then he is not doing a very good job of that. The U.S. is opposing a UN resolution. I'm not sure if this is a general resolution or a Security Council resolution that would allow 5 West African countries to fight Islamist groups in that region. I've talked about this several times in the past, so I won't get into too many details. I think the most interesting part is that the U.S. is opposing this. Seemingly the U.S. supports the fight against terror everywhere around the world, and even including in Southeast Asia, the Philippines. I could think of 1 or 2 reasons why the U.S. would be opposing the resolution. The first is that the U.S. said that these countries don't need to seek the approval of the UN to carry out this intervention. The U.S. typically doesn't like it when presidents are sent that require them to jump through more hoops to carry out military actions overseas. We see this at home and in the UN, and so this may be the U.S. saying, hey, we're not going to bother to seek a UN resolution saying that we could blow up and starve the people of Yemen, and so these countries don't have to either. It also may be a funding issue. The U.S. stated in the comments about this is that they already provide a lot of funding to the fighting of Boko Haram, so maybe they're just tired of U.S. funding going towards these countries where it'll probably be squandered just as much as used to fight the enemy. Moving to Afghanistan, we had 3 U.S. soldiers killed in Afghanistan over the weekend. 2 more were wounded. This is another one of the infiltrator attacks that I have been talking about on the show really since it started. What happens in these attacks is that members of the Taliban dress or join the Iraqi forces in disguise, saying that they support the Iraqi forces. Whenever they're then around an opportunity to kill a lot of Iraqi forces or to attack a U.S. troop, they'll show their true colors and then either open fire or blow the sums up, or in whatever way kill as many people as possible. These attacks seem to be becoming more dangerous because the Afghani military is just taking a beating. Deaths in the Iraqi or in the Afghani military were up 35% in 2016 over 2015. And so, and I guess a trend for 2017 is even more so. As more of your own soldiers die, you have to get a little bit more desperate in your search for troops. I guess that inherently leads to the chance being more and more frequent that you're going to have Taliban fighters embedded within your Afghani army ranks. And the more U.S. presidents you have in Afghanistan, the more often that U.S. troops are going to be around these Taliban's posing Afghani troops and eventually killing the U.S. soldiers. And so if Trump continues the U.S. policy of Obama of keeping U.S. troops in Afghanistan, continuing to try to support and assist the Afghani troops, you're going to put U.S. soldiers in harm's way and put them in positions where they are going to be killed. The Taliban is getting stronger in Afghanistan. There seems to be nothing the U.S. could do to prevent this anyways. Just want to point out again that all of these troop deaths are really not only on the hands of the attacker, who certainly are carrying out acts of war and pretty cowardly and possibly war crimes type of war, but on Donald Trump, who has the power to bring every single one of these young men and women home tomorrow and to take them out of the line of danger, to put them in a position where they don't have to worry about dying every day. However, he chooses to have them fighting a losing cause in Afghanistan. Moving to Ethiopia, we have 7.8 million people that are about to run out of food aid. Ethiopia is facing a drought, much like some other countries in the region. Ethiopia's is, unlike the ones in Somalia, Nigeria, or Yemen, or South Sudan, are environmentally caused, while the other ones are militarily caused. At least to some extent. I'm sure there, is some rebellion in Ethiopia somewhere that's causing some problems. A lot of people are concerned about what happens when the food aid does run out, just because there's another 20 million people in the region already starving, already facing famine conditions. And so is the money for the aid going to exist for these causes? Of course, it would really be so simple if the U.S. just bought like one less aircraft carrier and decided to take that money and feed a bunch of these people. So, at least something like that, the money is going to saving people, not killing people. We're reducing the problems caused in the Middle East. Of course, in countries like South Sudan, we already have the famine declared. In Yemen, the famine there is coming. There's a massive cholera outbreak where over 120,000 people have now contracted cholera, resulting in at least 800 deaths. These are 800 people who died from a purely treatable condition that only takes a couple bags of saline to treat. And that's because the people who are dying because they're vomiting and getting diarrhea until their body just dehydrates and they die. Certainly not something anybody should be dying from in 2017. And just looking at the humanitarian crisis from stretching from Nigeria to Yemen is absolutely terrible. Another country that's facing famine is also facing a U.S. war against a militia group there. The U.S. is trying to take out Al-Shabaab, which controls a lot of the southern portion of Somalia. Al-Shabaab, of course, has declared as being loyal to Al-Qaeda and is a jihadist group. They attacked a Somalian government military base, killing over 60 soldiers and stealing a bunch of vehicles last week. I'm assuming that this is in a lot of ways retaliation for that attack. The U.S. claims to have taken out a major Al-Shabaab target and killed 8 people in that attack. While it's nice for the U.S. to put out these words, it's nice for the media to repeat them, we don't know how true it is that this was a major target and that 8 militia fighters died. It's entirely possible that they hit some low-level Al-Shabaab fighter who was with his wife and 6 children, and they're just counting them all as militant deaths because if one militant's around, then everybody else around them is assumed to be a militant at times. So as this story develops, I will try to keep up on making sure that the U.S. is being honest when they say they killed 8 members of Al-Shabaab and they really didn't kill a bunch of children. We have a major development coming out of Libya, and that is the son of Muammar Gaddafi, Saif al-Islam. His last name, I guess, is not Gaddafi. It must have been changed at some point. Sounds like a religious thing, but I am not sure. Has been released from jail. Al-Islam was held from 2001 up until now by a Libyan militant group. That group seems to hold some kind of alliance to the Eastern Haftar government. I'm not sure to what extent. it was because that government's parliament passed a resolution granting amnesty for the war crimes of al-Islam, that he was released from there. Al-Islam has returned to the area controlled by the eastern part of the government. A lot of people are speculating this may be an attempt to reunite Libya years after Obama went in and destroyed the country. I guess it was always said that Muammar Gaddafi, the father, was the only one who held, I guess, the fear and respect needed to unite the country, and that only a Gaddafi could ever rule Libya, so maybe this will give the country a chance to reunite. While, maybe I'm not a huge fan of this guy, it does seem like if they could calm down the war effort there, it would be better. Read an article by a journalist who had just visited the desert in southwest Libya. What she encountered is basically every town is controlled by a different group, and very few people could travel between each town. They just had to have respect to the local tribes controlling them. At times, towns are even fractured into groups. Several different conflicts have broken out between these towns as the different militant groups decide to go to war with one another, form alliances, and things of that nature occur. The volume of the people in Libya was that they don't even know who to support at this point. I'm sure everybody has pretty much committed war crimes, and that no government really seems to have any legitimacy. So if this younger Gaddafi can go and form up a government with some government in the east and the west of the country, then maybe they can reunite Libya and bring some peace and stability to the region. A man in Pakistan has been sentenced to death by a court for blasphemy. What happened was the man was interacting with a member of the Pakistani, I guess, religious police type of person on Facebook. The man, I guess, said bad things about Muhammad on Facebook and was then brought to trial and sentenced to death. This is the first man to be sentenced to death for something posted on social media in Pakistan, but he is not the only person on trial awaiting possible death sentences for this. Very disturbing trend in Pakistan. I don't have too much else to say about it. It's just really upsetting that there's places in the world where this is still an issue. Of course, the U.S. is committing war crimes all over the place and nobody really cares, so we all have our problems. In Mosul, around 180,000 people, civilians, still remain in the 1.5 square miles held by ISIS. The high ratio of people to, I guess, the, area there makes it a really dangerous target. It's going to be really hard to drop bombs without killing civilians because there's just civilians everywhere. ISIS, of course, utilizes the civilians to the best of their ability to use the civilians as human shields. The U.S. and Iraqi governments seem to have been showing, especially in the trying to take the old city in East Mosul, pretty low amount, or West Mosul, a pretty low amount of concern for civilian lives. At this point, the U.S. is now using white phosphorus in both Mosul and in Raqqa. There's video evidence of both of these attacks. The one in Mosul, the white phosphorus was detonated on the ground. They seem to be using it for tactical moves, I guess, to allow their troops to move and avoid sniper fire and just the identification by the ISIS fighters in the area. The U.S. claims that this isn't happening in areas where there's civilians, but the white phosphorus starts a lot of fires, and so even if you shoot it off in one area, it doesn't mean a fire can't spread and kill civilians in the other areas. There's also the issue that just with how many people are packed into the remaining area that ISIS holds in West Mosul, there's really not a whole lot of places where there aren't civilians. Not to mention with so many homes having been destroyed and people pretty much living wherever they can to survive, including packing like 50 people into a house at times. I just think that it's probably impossible for you to ever actually know where everybody is, and to think that you could carry off one of these attacks in that manner. An increasing problem in West Mosul has been buildings collapsing, so even if the U.S. isn't hitting a target that has civilians with a bomb, if civilians are in neighboring structures, this is an issue, especially in the old city. The ground shakes and then it kills civilians in the other areas. The U.S. is using a lot of 500-pound bombs in the taking of West Mosul, so that they could collapse structures, 2 or 3 houses over. This has caused a lot of civilians to die in that manner. In Raqqa, the U.S. is detonating the white phosphorus off of the ground. I guess this would also provide some sort of visibility security. However, detonating the white phosphorus above the ground disperses it over a wider area, causing more chances of fires. A lot of structures in Raqqa are being burned by this this use of white phosphorus. In both cases, this is a war crime. You are not allowed to use white phosphorus in civilian population. However, this seems to be just another one of the war crimes like torture that gets ignored, because Saudi Arabia has certainly carried out these type of attacks in Yemen. The Syrian Democrat forces claim they have now taken 2 districts in Raqqa, and that I believe I've seen that up to maybe 20,000 civilians have been liberated in Raqqa so far. While this is a small success, there's still just a long way to go. It seems like there's an awful lot of civilians dying, especially civilians that are fleeing in Raqqa. Seem to be getting hit a lot. In the southern Syrian desert, we have some actions going on between Russia and the U.S. The U.S. gave Russia credit for helping to ease tensions in the region. I'm not sure what Russia did, but I guess we haven't seen an attack since Thursday, and so there was an attack on Tuesday and Thursday, so maybe the trend has slowed down a little bit. Just so everybody knows what the U.S. is doing in southern Syria, there's a town called Al-Tanf. In that town, the U.S. has a garrison. A U.S.-supported Syrian rebel group, anti-Assad Syrian rebel group, controls the town. The U.S. has imposed a 50-kilometer deconfliction zone around the garrison at Al-Tam. This means that if anybody the U.S. doesn't want enters into that 50-kilometer zone, that the U.S. could just blow those people up and have carried out attacks 4 times for that reason. The U.S. has absolutely no legal authority to do this, but as the mainstream media likes to mention, they dumped flyers on the Assad allied troops there and told them not to do it, so, that gives the U.S. the right to do it. Of course, I don't know how the U.S. gets away with this. They walked into Syria uninvited and then cleared the area of Syria their own to do with what they please. Russia, for their part, came out and told the U.S. that those attacks are unacceptable against the Assad-backed troops, so I guess we'll see what happens. It seems that the U.S. has a little bit more rosy view of what's going on there than Russia. In north of Syria, in the town of Al-Bab that was taken and held by Turkish-backed forces, the Turkish-backed rebel groups are now fighting each other there. There's no clue as to what brought out the fighting yet, but this is kind of common within the Syrian rebel groups, is that they have so many differences of their own that if they occupy the same area for so long, they end up fighting each other as well as Assad and ISIS and everybody else. Quick update on the Philippines situation. The Islamist-linked group continues to hold the town of Marari. The U.S. is now providing support, including surveillance by an Orion plane and then some special operations assistance. It does not sound like the U.S. Special Operations soldiers are anywhere on the ground within the city, but are just giving the Philippines advice. Duarte, for his part, says that the Philippines did not ask for it. He didn't say that they're not getting it. I think the Philippines has a pretty complicated relationship with the United States and the West after the Spanish-American War and the U.S. occupation of the Philippines following. That involved a lot of torture and a lot of war crimes committed by U.S. troops. The group that holds the remaining part of the city is led by 2 brothers who recently traveled to the Middle East. They're the Maute brothers, M-A-U-T-E. Brothers, if you want to look them up. Interestingly enough, it just from civilian reporting what's going on in the city, it doesn't sound like there's quite the bloodshed against civilians that we've seen reported out of Fallujah, Ramadi, Mosul, Raqqa, or anywhere in Syria and ISIS Syria and Iraq that ISIS held. So maybe this group is a little less extreme, not that they're any better, just that they may behead people less, and it may not be quite so terrible for the civilians who remain in the Philippines. There are under 2,000 civilians in the rebel-held areas there. Alright, that'll do it for the show, everyone, today. I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope you all can share it and then subscribe on iTunes and give me a rating and review there. Those rating and reviews are helpful in bumping me up in the rankings. Also, like my Facebook page, Kyle Files. I'm closing in on 100 likes there. It'd be really cool to hit that. Look at the Facebook group, Foreign Policy Focus. We chat about foreign policy stuff in there. My personal website is kylesfilesblog.com, and I write on the Libertarian Institute My news roundups go up every day there. That's libertarianinstitute.org. My Twitter handle is KYAAALE. See you all Wednesday.